follow along, but we thought what we would do, rather than just stand here and have me blah, 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 or whatever, we thought we'd have more of a town hall kind of community chat. So we'll put slides up there for you to follow along and talk to or speak to the subjects that are on the slides as we go along. And I'm hoping that you'll feel comfortable and just ask any questions as we do go along. If that sounds good to everybody. Once again, I'm Diane Douglas. I've been studying for education for over 20 years, not in a university or college. I didn't care about having alphabet soup after my name, but I realized when my daughter was in 2nd grade, I had some eye-opening experiences, and I thought, I better understand what's going on here. So I started studying, ultimately ran for the Peoria School Board, one of the largest districts in the state, served 8 years on that board. 2 years as the board president, and in 2012, for a lot of reasons, but one in particular, decided to not run for re-election. Friends don't let friends run for school board, but once you're on, you have to find a conservative to take your place. So I did, got him elected, and now I'm out speaking against Common Core, and ultimately ended up deciding to run for superintendent of public instruction.
Thank you, Diane. I'm Jennifer Reynolds, and I have 4 young children. I have a 15-year-old, a 13-year-old, an 11-year-old, and an 8-year-old. And I was directly impacted by Common Core. I initially heard about it in 2012. In August 2012, I was at a curriculum night for my 4th grade son, and they said, I had never heard of Common Core before, and they said that we're going to adopt Common Core standards for English language arts and math to prepare our kids for the global economy. I said, what? The global economy? I was already fighting a program called Agenda 21, which talks about how we can all be good global citizens. And also I've done a lot of research on International Baccalaureate, which also says how we can be good global citizens. So I was really concerned about this. I came home and I talked to my husband about it. I immediately called my friend Mick, who lives in Ahwatukee. I live in Chandler. And I asked him, I said, hey Mick, what the heck is Common Core? So he said, oh, I've been researching this for months. My private school where my daughter attends is also adopting Common Core. And hey, let me show you this site, Hoosiers Against Common Core, Stop Common Core, which is a Georgian site, Truth in American Education. So I started reading and reading and reading. I was appalled. The more I read, the more I was shocked. It wasn't until 2 months later that my son Joseph started bringing home this new voodoo math. And he's extremely smart in math. I'm an engineer. I'm an environmental engineer. My husband's an electrical engineer. And I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Instead of doing long division and triple-digit multiplication with the methods that we learned, the algorithms that we learned, they were using conceptual methods, which we'll talk about later, using matrices to break down the numbers. Instead of dividing 356 by 2, they would break it down to 350 and then draw circles for the 6. And instead of taking 15 minutes to do 30 math problems, now it's taking him 2 hours. He would come home crying, Mom, I have 30 math problems. I'm going to be up all night. And he was extremely frustrated, and so I started talking to his teacher and saying, hey, what gives? What's going on with this Common Core? And so did all the other parents in the classroom. We were in an uproar. And so I asked her, show me how this will make our kids smarter. Where's the international benchmarks which prove that they'll make our kids smarter? I'm not sure. She forwarded me to the district, the math lead in the district. But the math lead in the district didn't know either. All she forwarded me is math websites with more worksheets for the kids to do, which had nothing to do with Common Core. I took a lot of math in college, and I was again appalled. So I attended a school board meeting, my first school board meeting I had ever attended before. I was given my 3 minutes. It wasn't on the agenda, so I was told, we'll get to your questions later. I asked him, where's the international benchmarks? How are we going to pay for this? Show me how this is going to make our kids smarter. A month later, an unelected board underneath the school board who does curriculum at the Kyrene School District called me back, and she still didn't have answers and basically told me we're doing what the State Board of Education tells us to do. So that's when I met Wes in January of 2013. I started following Huppenthal around anytime he spoke. He was my state senator, my state representative, and now he's a superintendent. So I know him very well, and he knows me very well. I started asking him the tough questions. He didn't like me very much because I was embarrassing him and asking him the real questions. So that's my story. A month later, in February 2013, I started the website, and it's taken off like wildfire. So back to Diane. Arizona's Against Common Core.
And that's all one, should be all one word, although it divided it up for me up on the top there on the right. side. Arizona did the Common Core. Unfortunately now the progressives in education have turned our system into a nationalized one, and their goal is to create what they call human capital. That your children should be educated just enough to hold a job, earn a wage, and basically consume in our consumer-based. Anything?
I was just going to add, as you'll notice, this progressive movement started in the 1920s. And this is when the National Education Association, the NEA, was formed. And it was supposed to be there to help teachers and all that. So it was actually a lobbyist group to further the progressive movement, the nationalized education movement. It really took off. We'll see in the next slide, you have the dates. In the next slide, in the early 1990s is when it really took off under the Clinton administration through the Workforce Investment Act and Goals 2000, which we'll talk about in a minute. That's when this nationalized movement really started taking off, was in the early 90s.
And I always include this slide just so that you can all see that what's going on in education is not a Republican-Democrat issue. At the national level, both sides of the aisle have wanted to get their grasp on our children basically to their own ends. So let's ask the two most pertinent questions in my mind about Common Core. And there are a lot of questions about Common Core, but there's two. Once you answer these, really nothing else matters. Number one, is it a mandate? Yes, it absolutely is a federal mandate, because during 2009, President Obama created a pool of money, $4.35 billion, under the American Recovery and Restoration Act, I believe its name is. Reinvestment. I'm sorry. It means it is forced upon. You must do this.
You must do this in order to get this.
Right. And that's why it's a mandate, because through the Race to the Top grant, in order to get the grant money and get what were called the No Child Left Behind waivers, which was the former federal scheme, which was absolutely impossible. That was in effect when I was on the school board, and that said every single child will be proficient under the state standards by the year 2014. It would have been by the end of this school year. Every single child. Well, children are human beings. Children have their limitations. Some have strengths, some have weaknesses, some are great in math, some are great in English. You know, you can't make every single child proficient in the same exact everything unless it's a chalk line on the ground, not a bar up here of higher standards. So in order to get the money, we had to adopt Common Core, and for those that argue that we didn't have to, from our own State Board of Ed meeting minutes, February of 2009, the state is required to adopt the Common Core standards. That's not a mandate, that's coercion. If you want your money back, that's our tax money, you must do that. The next question I think is most relevant is it constitutional or is it legal? Absolutely not. 10th Amendment says the federal government can only do what the federal government is allowed to do, delegated to it by the states, by the people. Otherwise, the right is reserved for the people. And nowhere in the Constitution of the United States can you find education addressed. So therefore, it is ours solely, wholly, and completely. There's 3 federal congressional acts that prohibit the federal government to be involved in education. They talk about it in terms of curriculum. But back in the 60s and 70s, that's how we spoke about education and what we were going to teach our children, because we didn't use the term standards yet. So now what they're saying is, oh, well, Common Core is just standards. It's not messing with curriculum, and so it doesn't violate these acts. But they're playing a semantics game. Right. Anything you'd like to add in here?
And just on that same note, if you actually read the standards, which we're going to talk about in a minute, in the standards themselves there is exemplar text, which are examples of textbooks that you can use. So that right there is curriculum. These Common Core standards have a curriculum embedded in them. So when they say these are just standards, schools can add to them whatever they want, well, they're already dictating curriculum to them inside the standards. So don't be fooled by that statement. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I was just going to say they already have contracts with Pearson and others to produce the curriculum for it.
Sure, and they're doing it through the book.
And by the time stage 4 is there, you can't take anything away. You can only add 15%. So what they're just feeding you a little bit at a time.
Yes.
Spinning.
Fibbing left and right.
Black and white.
Yes, ma'am.
So How long has it been going on? How long has the standards been in place?
Well, our state adopted them in June 2010. Our state was in financial duress in June 2010. We were renting out our state capitol buildings, which we are still renting out today. We were financially distraught. We were not meeting the requirements for No Child Left Behind, which require a letter grade system for our teachers in our schools. It requires achievement tracking, a certain percentage for graduation, etc. We were not making these requirements, so Obama had the carrot out there. Hey, I'll provide you with this race to the top money and a Common Core or No Child Left Behind waiver if you adopt Common Core. So that's how we got hook, line, and sinkered into the program.
So, and the other thing they tell us, I use a quote. The gentleman's name was Josh Billings, and I paraphrase his quote. It's not what we don't know, it's what we're being told that isn't so about Common Core. They tell us it's a state-led grassroots effort. Nothing could be further from the truth. They were created behind closed doors in Washington, D.C. by a group called Achieve Inc. They've been around for a long time. David Coleman is the architect. They had two groups, a writing group and a validation group for English language arts, and then two of the same committees for the math standards. Well, they put in math one educator, what's his name?
In math, and for math, and that's why they say they're state-led as well. We had one educator. The standards were already written, so they brought this working group together to make a facade that we have state involvement. So they signed up Dr. William McCollum, he's from the University of Arizona, to help with these standards. And I have some very important things to tell you about him tonight. But he was called, so therefore these are state-led standards. Even though the standards were already being written behind the scenes before he even showed up, and he was paid $4 million by Bill and Melinda Gates, the University of Arizona, to get involved. So don't believe that lie either.
So they wrote them behind closed doors, and the important thing for you to remember is we have a representative republic. So we elect school boards to represent us. We would hope we'd elect a state board of ed. That's not the case. So if we want to change how we educate our children, it should be done in the open. It should be done in open public meetings where people can come in like yourselves and sit and listen, make comment, help weigh in. Nothing could be further from the case. They wrote them behind closed doors. Then they passed them off to the National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers. Now, they sound like locally state-led groups, don't they? No, they're not. They're trade organizations. They're lobbying organizations for not even every governor or school superintendent belongs to them, just those from the states that choose to belong. And they're very heavily funded, once again, by federal tax dollars. So then, and to your 15%, Nancy, our state, they claim that we can add 15% on top of the standards to our curriculum. It won't be tested, but the state has already exercised its option to add to the curriculum so that a school could independently do so. Who knows what's available to be done? And our unelected State Board of Education virtually adopted them sight unseen. The finals came out in the beginning of June. They adopted them at the end of June.
And I have to mention Bill and Melinda Gates because they've been there from the very beginning. They were lobbying the NGA and the CCSSO starting in 2007 to create this facade of state involvement. They bribed them with $2 million to get this working group together, the Common Core Working Group and the Common Core Validation Committee. And they've pledged over $300 million to all of the testing companies, publishing companies, big universities and things like that, the Chamber of Commerce, which is promoting Common Core, the United Way, which is promoting Common Core, all these organizations, the PTA, which is promoting Common Core. So they've pledged over $300 million to all these organizations to say Common Core is fantastic. So they've been there from the very beginning. We'll find out why. Why does Bill and Melinda Gates, why do they want to be involved in this?
And let me add something to Jennifer's point about the Chamber of Commerce. And they have, Bill and Melinda Gates have given them the better part of $2 million to run campaign. We have a campaign here on TV with many of our local people telling us how great Common Core is. Let me give you a little secret. The Chamber of Commerce doesn't care if your child gets educated or your children get educated or your little ones get educated. They care that a large enough pool of workers get educated, but if society and we as parents care about to make sure our own individual children get a great education. That's our responsibility. But we shouldn't be listening to outside masters for the type of education our children get, at least not in my humble opinion.
Exactly. And the major publishing companies, they've also been pulling money from the very beginning to the NGA and also to Achieve Inc. because all the textbooks are now going to have to be aligned to these new Common Core standards. So a lot of the school districts, hook, line, and sinker, are adopting new textbooks, even though they didn't know what Common Core was about and how it would affect our children. Oh, new standards, we got to adopt new textbooks. So they're making lots of money. The world leader publishing company is Pearson. Pearson has they're the largest in the world for online textbooks. They are administering the new test, Partnership for Assessment for Readiness of College and Careers, which will replace AIMS. And the big computer companies, Intel, Dell, are going to make a lot of money because the new test is also going to be on tablets, and the new books will be all electronic.
You can't see that. Okay, do you want to take a little foray down to some of the people who are not, what we do, the way our founding fathers intended it, was for us to locally elect our representatives to help oversee our local school and the education of our children. We have an unelected state board of education in this state, 11 members. 4 of them are supposed to be lay people, which means they're not employed in education, they have no specialized knowledge in education. I don't think I could fill the bill because I sat on a school board for 8 years and was the president of the school board for 2. We have all education insiders. We'll talk about the individuals in just a minute. But who do they listen to? Much like when Jennifer went to her local school board meeting, if you go to a state board of ed meeting, which are held the 3rd Monday of the month at 9 o'clock in the morning, where virtually no John Q. citizens, or when virtually no John Q. citizens can go, and they do not broadcast their meetings, you would go and you would get 3 minutes to make your point about whatever you wanted to say to those people who are supposed to represent you. All of these organizations get to come in and do huge presentations to them. Half an hour, they'll be given 15, 20 minutes, half an hour. This group, again, are all unelected boards, Arizona Ready Council or P20 Council. P stands for preschool, 20 stands for grade 20. They are all unelected boards, appointed boards, who, although they don't make education policy, they very strongly influence education policy, and they have far more say than you do, because this is the group that basically tells the State Board of Ed which direction they want to go, and then the State Board of Ed either mandates to the school districts or gets legislation passed that the school districts must follow. And then these are all the alphabet soup of unions and professional organizations involved with education that also get a lot of time before the State Board of Ed. And I say this, I'm not picking on or impugning any teachers. We have a lot of teachers that work very hard. I know that from my own experience in the classroom every single day. But these are organizations that are working in their self-interest, not in the interests of our children. We can add before we...
The P20 Council, by the way, what Diane was mentioning, that was created under the Workforce Investment Act. It was a council created by Governor Janet Napolitano, and by executive order in 2005, and that's now been converted to the Arizona Ready Education Exchange Council by another executive order by Jan Brewer in 2011. So those are all appointed people who influence the legislature to pass bills to get more money for them. They are not elected, they are all appointed by the governor.
And although many of them are nonprofits, Expect More Arizona, First Things like that, don't doubt that there are not millions, tens of millions of dollars in influence being peddled and in our tax dollars being used by these organizations. Now, the next slide I had created as I started researching this. I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. That's a really good question. I meant to mention that. That is the number of people on those unelected boards. Great question. So we have 11 on our State Board of Ed, 19 on the P20 Council. Our Arizona Chamber of Commerce includes 90 board members. and they're all getting their voice in. Expect More Arizona is kind of the public relations arm of the Arizona Ready Council. Yes, ma'am.
Why is there so many in the West Ed? Is that because of the important?
West Ed is an interesting organization. When I was on the school board, they said that West Ed was an independent research lab into education, bipartisan independent lab. Well, come to find out, there's really, I forget how many, 9, 10, 11 of them. The United States is broken up into regions, and each region has, ours in the West Coast is called West Ed. I forget the one there's one up in Colorado, but anyway, they've got all these regional labs. Well, they're actually underwritten by the federal government. So it's the federal government doing the research to determine the outcome that we need in education. So, and that has a very, very large board on it. And if we pop to the next one, I think we'll see. I wanted to call this the incestuous ties, but I decided to be polite and call it the ties that bind. You'll see some of the overlap between some of these different boards. One gentleman I didn't put on here, Robert Rice, was I think he's on the Chandler School Board. He was the president. Is he up there? Oh, there he is. Past president of ASBA, Expect More Arizona, and was also appointed to West Ed. So you can see how the same people are sitting on different boards and manipulating our tax money. Two, I want to point out, and then you can pick out some of your favorites. Well, first of all, Jaime Malera, Eileen Klein, and Jacob Moore, and with a woman who's now left, Diane Ortiz-Parson, they are our 4 lay people on our State Board of Ed. Jaime Malera, when I came on the Peoria School Board, he was our paid employee lobbyist, and I may not remember the numbers correctly, but if I remember correctly, his hours were a .25, so he was a quarter-time employee, and I believe we were paying him in the neighborhood of $80,000 a year. He was the highest paid employee of the school district if you prorated his salary out. You can't say someone like that is not an education insider. Craig Barrett, former CEO of Intel, was on the board of Achieve Inc. He's the chairman of our Arizona Ready Council, and he also is the chairman of charter schools that are saying they don't have to use the Common Core while he's mandating it for the rest of us. And I think that was pretty much it. You can have some fun if there's some people.
I was going to talk about Craig Barrett as well. He was the former CEO of Intel. Intel has their new iTeach tablets, which we can use in the classroom for all these new online books and to take the PARCC test. So I've actually gone toe-to-toe with him in the legislature where I spoke, and then he purposely spoke right after me to discount everything I said in the legislature. So he is not my favorite person. He is the worst person on the list, if you ask me, because he left Intel, went to Achieve, and is now ruining the nation with his progressive education agenda.
Well, and as we mentioned before, Mr. Hammer, Chamber of Commerce. Chamber of Commerce has been paid by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation millions of dollars to run public relations ads in favor of Common Core. He's on our Chamber of Commerce, and he's on our Arizona P20 Council, which is influencing education policy in front of our State Board of Ed. So I think you guys kind of get the idea of what we're up against with these people and how they are using the system to their advantage and not to our children's advantage. Okay, so this is one of my favorites. Because people talk, they say, well, we can't keep the Ames test. The Ames test is terrible. Our Arizona standards are awful. We have to get rid of it. And I speak from my experience on the school board with this slide. The Ames test was our test, the Arizona Instrument of Measuring Standards. We had Arizona state standards that were wholly and separate apart. They were deemed to be some of the best standards in the nation. They were content standards. Our Arizona standards are content standards. Common Core are considered skills standards by Dr. Stotsky, who is one of the best experts in standards in the nation. So people far more informed than I. Let me give you an idea of the difference between a skill set standard and a content standard. Think of a list of vocabulary words. With a content standard, the children are going to learn the word, they're going to learn how to spell the word, they're going to learn the definition of the word, they're going to learn how to use the word in a sentence, they're going to recognize the word and its meaning when they come across it. type it on a keyboard. That's the difference between a skill and content knowledge. So how did we get from Ames to the and good standards to now having to convert to Common Core? Well, interestingly, it's thanks to John Hoopenthal, our current superintendent of public instruction, who now says that our standards are so bad they have to be replaced. What happened in 2005, and I was on the school board back then, we realized that the class of 2006 had to pass the Ames test in order to get a high school diploma. They had 5 tries starting in their sophomore year, and the classes before that started going through practice, but it wasn't a high-stakes test just yet. So we're approaching 2006, and all of a sudden we realized that some astronomically high percentage of our students, probably 25 or 30% if I remember the number correctly, were not passing their Ames test, and they would not get a diploma. Well, the legislature lost their backbone. They couldn't have the public outcry of 30% of the students, if that was the number, not being issued a diploma for the class of 2006. So what they did was John Hoopenthal passed a bill, Senate Bill 1038. He was the primary sponsor of it in 2005. And what it said was, school boards, you now no longer have to ensure that the children pass the Ames test. You can augment their scores. So, you didn't pass your Ames test in 5 tries. Did you come to class every day? Did you do your homework every day? Oh, you're supposed to say yes. Did you go to extra help if we offered it every time? God bless you. Every time it was available, then we were allowed to give them the credit to get the passing grade on the score, on the test, rather than having actually proved that they mastered the material. And that's what happened to education in Arizona by the same person who now is running our education system and overseeing it. And I put up there, Arizona College and Career Ready standards are the federal Common Core standards, because all they did is change the name. In the media, you'll hear Arizona College and Career Ready. They are the Common Core. Did you have a question?
Wouldn't them failing that 25 to 30% be their own fault because they didn't go the extra mile or they didn't participate in class?
I think that's a fair assessment. You know, can everybody pass the exact same test? Maybe, maybe not. But, you know, then we have some issues to look at. But that's a huge percentage to not pass. And then to just say, well, we can do something else, you know, to give them the credit is disingenuous. It serves no one. Samuel.
Mom, can you explain a little bit why Ames does not work?
Yeah, I can tell you, for No Child Left Behind, we are required to have an achievement score for our students and for our teachers and also our schools. In order to do that, part of the new grading system right now under Common Core is the teachers, a percentage of their score, their letter grade that they're going to get, is based on how their students perform on the test. So teachers are scared that when their students are not performing on the test that they're not going to get their A rating. Therefore, they start teaching to the test. You'll notice on the Department of Education website, there are sample test booklets. How is it a true snapshot of how your students performing if you're teaching to the test? That is dumbing down the test. If you're saying question A is going to look like this, question B is going to look like this, question C is going to look like this. That is not a true assessment. If you want assessment, it should be a snapshot. Boom, we're having a pop quiz today. This is what it's going to be on. You don't study for it. If you study for the test and do sample test booklets, you're dumbing down the test. And teachers are so frightened because of No Child Left Behind and not getting that A letter grade and not getting that salary increase that the Ames test has been dumbed down. Yes, sir.
Before you go to the next slide, I just want to make sure that I understand the terms of your Fordham Foundation, AZELA, and FB. What is all that?
Yes. The Fordham Foundation, pretty much since the standards movement started back in the mid-1990s, they have taken it upon themselves to evaluate state standards, and every state had different standards. So how they evaluated Arizona state standards in 2010, the year we adopted Common Core, they evaluated our English language arts and our math standards at a B, solid B. The Common Core standards, they evaluated English language arts to be a B+, and they have a rubric on there how they determine that. and math standards are an A-. Now, the Fordham Foundation was given, I forget how much money, over $1 million. It might have pushed 2 million, maybe even 3. I don't know. Kind of 1.6 sticks in my mind. They were given $1.6 million by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation specifically to evaluate Common Core standards. So that makes me a little nervous that they might not have upped those a little bit. But we're being asked to invest in education. Most of the investment in Common Core here in Arizona and everywhere else will be in technology, not in our teachers. So buying tools and new fads out of the technology companies. The estimates in Arizona, although our State Board of Ed should have told us exactly how much they expected it to cost before they ever adopted it, that's in state law, they just ignored that and just adopted it anyway. The estimates are running up to $500 million in new taxes it will take to implement Common Core, to, if we agree that they're equal, that they're only marginally better, if we agree that they're the same type of standards.
Right, that's just what I was going to say is, you know, Bill and Melinda Gates had their hand again on the Fordham Institute. So are you going to trust anything that the Fordham Institute says? Something also to note about the Ames test scores. If you evaluate the Ames test scores and take out the immigration influence, which we have a large amount in this state, we actually score pretty high on the Ames test. We have the English language learners and non-English language learners. If you take the English language learners out of the Ames test scores, we score pretty well. So that's something that doesn't take into account as well on the Ames test, is we have that large immigration influence in Arizona too.
And just to add one more thing that you made me think about your comment, to the Fordham Foundation, now they've been evaluating state standards since the mid-90s. Arizona's have always been rated high, they've been consistent, and they've actually gotten better based on their rating. So it's not something that they just pulled a grade out of thin air. If we track it and follow the grading they've done, we've gotten a pretty good evaluation from them.
Is that partly because of the dumbing down process, though?
Well, they're not looking at test results. They're just looking at what we are expecting our children to learn when they do their evaluations.
So the expectation has increased?
They have said our Arizona standards have gotten stronger over time. The expectations for our children have gotten stronger. Now, one of my beefs with standards has always been that they're written in education ease and not plain English. You know, the law is supposed to be written in plain English so anybody can understand it. So should academic standards. If we want our children to learn how to add double-digit numbers by the end of first grade or whatever grade you choose, it should say children will learn how to add double-digit numbers by the end of first grade. It shouldn't say children will be able to get their minds around the process of conceptualizing numbers. That's how these things are written. They are not, you read them. I consider myself pretty savvy on things like that. I've been reading them a long time. It's like, what do they want?
Yeah, exactly. It's just gobbledygook when you're reading these. And the Common Core standards, like she mentioned, are skills. They're how-tos. They're not, you need to learn how to read by this level by fourth grade. They're how-tos is what they are, which is curriculum.
So let's take a little look at some of the things.
Yes, sir.
Tell us.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I'm clear about standards and exactly how they're implemented. So if the State Board of Education comes up with a standard, is there some kind of standardized test that all the students and all the schools are taking? And is there some kind of action that's taken if not a sufficient number passes, or exactly what is done?
What we used to do, Arizona state standards were written here in Arizona and we owned them and we could modify them as we want. So we wrote a set of standards and it's K through 12 and this is what kids should learn at whatever it is. Imagine all the subjects by all the grade levels. This is what we expect our children to learn. Then they write a standardized test. Now I believe we were only testing children 3rd grade, 8th grade, and then starting in 10th grade 5 times through high school so they could pass the graduation test. There might have been 5th grade test. 3rd, 5th, 8th, and then, so what supposedly the data those tests collect would help a student, help a teacher know in which way to direct a student. Now with Common Core, we had nothing to do with developing those standards. They were developed in Washington, D.C., and they were just put in place in Arizona by our State Board of Education. And now they're trying to develop the test to go around. We're field testing the PARCC test, but that's not been the test that has been adopted by our State Board of Ed. They're still silent on the matter.
Then why are they saying in my school that they adopted the PARCC testing and that next year they will be using that?
They're field testing it to see how the handwritten test works, and there's an electronic version test works. They're just testing it. They're getting comments back from you, and especially the teachers, to make improvements on it. The goal is to have it implemented next year, but they don't even have the computer database or internet structure or computers in the classroom to administer the test. That's the goal. 2015 is the magic number, but I don't see how they're ever going to get to 2015.
Well, and the other thing too, last legislative session, there was a bill, House Bill 2425, and what our legislature basically did, it used to be in state statute. We use the Arizona state standards, we test our children with the Ames test, we test them at this grade, this grade, this grade, this grade, and it is, in high school, it was a high stakes, you wouldn't get a diploma if you didn't pass the test. What our legislature did with House Bill 2425 is basically brush its hands of education and said, unelected State Board of Ed, you do whatever you want. You adopt what standards you want, you adopt whatever testing you want, we're going to let you do whatever you want. My question is, why do we need our legislators if they're passing their duties off to unelected boards?
Absolutely, and we tried our best to fight that, because the whole idea was we needed to get rid of Ames because this new test is coming on board, but there's nothing in place. The PARCC test is still being evaluated and written as we speak. Yes, Samuel?
So if we know that the Ames test does not truly assess how smart we are and see how well we've gained this knowledge, what is Common Core trying to do with the PARCC test? Like, sort of give a brief explanation. What is the PARCC test? What are they trying to do? And explain, like.
It's just Ames 2.0 is what I call it. Instead of having Ames just one time a year, they're going to have PARCC several times during the year, so you don't have to wait till the end of the year to get the score. But the problem with PARCC is it's an all-online test. You have to know a glossary before you can even administer the test due to the verbiage they use. Instead of saying 2 plus 2 equals 4, you have to explain in the 3rd grade why 2 plus 2 equals 4 and write an essay, and you get points based on how you get 1 point for the answer, you get 2 points for this sentence, and 3 points and 4 points, and the teachers are supposed to grade your 3rd grade students on how they came about 2 plus 2 equals 4. It's insane. And the new PARCC test for 3rd grade students is going to be an 8.5-hour total test given 4 times per year. In middle school, it's going to be a 9-hour test, and in high school, it's going to be a 9.5-hour test. Exactly.
And another interesting point a teacher made to me last week was, he said, you know, when he administers a test to his students, whether it was the Ames or whether it was a class test, he'd always tell them, if you get done early, you know, go back through, review any questions you struggled with, you know, double check your work, whatever the case may be. On a computer, it's just going to go to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, and there's going to be no way for the children to make sure they've completed an answer right or even second guess themselves on what they thought was the correct answer. So here's what they're doing with Common Core standards. We have math and language arts. The next one, I think I actually flipped this around. Science is next generation, not generation next. They've not been adopted by our State Board of Ed, but yet our school districts are implementing it already.
I'm sorry. Let's backtrack a little bit. You were talking about the test and like how they would want you to explain, you know, or want the kids to explain how 2 plus 2 and how they got it. And I'm sorry for this question, kind of playing devil's advocate here because I don't really understand. I don't understand why that's so bad. I don't know. And a 9-hour test, if you're like I'm a CPA, I had to take a 2-day test. I'm a CPA. I don't understand. Well, yeah, but the seniors,
So,
the adults.
you know, at a grade 3 level, it is memorization. It's memorization of the times table. So you think a student at a 3rd grade level, I have a 3rd grade daughter who isn't very proficient at the computer, first of all, to write an essay to explain why 2 2 equals 4. There was a perfect example recently by a second grader that said that was required on a Park field test to explain how he got the answer. He said, I asked my brain if this was the correct answer, and my brain said yes, and that's why I know 2 plus 2 equals 4. This is how insane this is.
That's nonsense.
You know, this is nonsense.
I want to go to Kimber too, so here's where it's coming from. At Kimber here, they, for math, for instance, she has to come up with her own problems, and at the end, she might have to take that test 5 times before they let her pass if she doesn't get it all but 2 right. So that's why I'm like, doesn't seem so bad to me. I'd rather have her take it 5 times and know that she knows it. So that's why I don't really understand.
Well, I would say to the point of arithmetic is algorithms you solve. It is not English language arts that you write descriptive paragraphs of how you came up with your answer. They're very specific algorithms, and the children need to learn those. And that's where the point and the focus should be. If a child comes up with 2 plus 2 equals 5, there's a little fly or something just liking me today.
Because she's so sweet.
Oh, yes. That's not what most people say. But thank you very much for that. They're teaching our teachers. If a child says 2 plus 2 equals 5 and they can explain a reason they got that answer, that will be a deemed correct answer, where if they say 2 plus 2 equals 4 and just solve the problem, that's incorrect. That's wrong. That will not create scientists, mathematicians, and engineers. That's not how you deal with arithmetic to teach it properly.
I'm confused what your question was.
Well, I wondered what was so bad. What's so bad about like having them explain how they came about 2 plus 2? Because I feel like in Kimber, the math, you have to come up with their own story problems, and they have to know how they got it.
That's a story problem, though. What she's saying, the story problems with Kimber, they still have to come up with 2 plus 2 is 4.
Yeah,
They can't come up with 2 plus 2 is 5.
but they have to know the concept well enough.
Oh, sure, that's
to
with,
do,
that's
to
with story
provide a
problems.
story problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's why I thought that doesn't seem so bad to me.
And you can have the backbone and know how to get how 2 plus 2 equals 4 by doing rote memorization. Until you have the basics, you cannot expect a 3rd grade student or a 2nd grade student, if they don't know the relationship between numbers, they don't know that 2, 4, 6, 8, they don't know how to count by 5s, by 10s, by 100s. You can't expect them at that grade level to come up with these essay questions. You just cannot. They don't have the backbone that they need. They're developmentally they can't do it.
Arithmetic has to be, they have to repeat it until it becomes internalized and goes into long-term memory. And once those formulas become automatic, then kids can pretty much do anything they want with them. But that's the step our education system has been bypassing. They call it drill and kill. They don't want, and I'm sure not here at Kimber Academy, but out in many places in public schools, they no longer want teachers to teach children. They want them to be the guide on the side rather than the sage on the stage. Honest to goodness, they truly use that sentence. And rather than, I know how 2 plus 2 equals 4 and instructing your child how to complete that algorithm, they want children to hunt and peck. And we'll give you some examples on that in curriculum. Rather than learning the tried and true, they almost want them to redevelop learning in and of themselves, and whether they get the right answer or not, and that's not appropriate. It's not developmentally appropriate.
So are you going to, it sounds like an answer, but what is the correct answer for 2 plus 2 equals 4?
Well, we have some examples for math on how they expect you to solve problems now under Common Core.
I mean, I don't know that they have a paragraph that says this is the correct written answer for 2 plus 2.
Well, you can look online at some of the Park field tests. There's the teacher's sample guide versus what the student learns, and they do have a grading rubric. If you just say 2 plus 2 equals 4, you only get 1 point. And they expect this sentence, this sentence, this sentence in order for you to get the full 5 points.
And Park is Galileo. I'm forgetting Galileo.
I don't know.
I'm not sure which Galileo. That might be a pre-existing text. That's not what the consortium is.
Yes.
So, with the having to explain how you got 2 + 2 = 4. We've had to do a similar thing in geometry, where we have a certain equation and there's steps of how to like break it down and get the answer, and then you have to say like which property you use. Like if I understand how to solve using simple like addition, subtraction, division, and multiplication, I shouldn't need to explain how I got it by using those steps. I should do the steps and I should get the answer. I shouldn't have to explain.
Exactly, and that's what they expect you to do under PARC.
And another thing is, you know, some of these things may be fine to do at a developmentally appropriate time when certain steps and certain foundations have been laid and they can get to. One of the things under Common Core is asking kindergartners to think abstractly. Children up to about 3rd or 4th grade are not capable of abstract concepts. Every single one, no, not every single one, but as the vast majority, there's certain things, and if you ask children to do things before they're developmentally appropriate, they can end up doing more harm to a child than they will do good for them. I mean, it's like the analogy I give, it's like asking a newborn or forcing a newborn to walk. It may seem very rigorous to ask them to do that, but it's physically, developmentally impossible. So it works the same with brain development. Brain develops in certain ways, and it has to learn how to do certain things in certain sequences. And with Common Core standards, they did not consult one child development, early childhood development expert. They brought no one in.
Anyway, you had a question?
Well, no, I was just going to say that it seems like they're purposely just trying to frustrate them.
Yes.
Because, you know, I had accidentally bought the Singapore math for my son, and he's a 1st grader, so this is like the same age group, you know, that you're talking about, where we were doing the book, and he was completely frustrated. I didn't understand why they were throwing these weird things in at different times and stuff, and I finally figured out that it was Common Core that it was on. It was Singapore math, and you know, we just threw the book out and just started going old school, and you know, just doing the memorizing, and you know, and he totally gets it. He's doing fine. He's not getting, you know, angry and frustrated anymore with just weird stuff that they threw in that we never did in 1st grade. And
Yeah,
it's like they're purposely trying to frustrate him for some reason.
Yeah, I saw the same thing with my 4th grade son, and it's to get the parents out of the equation as well. Make it so confusing and frustrating that parents will go, hey, I don't understand, and just go back to the school, you know, ask your teacher, trust the school will take care of it. So I started doing it with my son so he wouldn't come home crying every day when I'm like, son, why are you doing math this way? I'd have him show me how he was taught that day, and I showed him how I learned it. We did problems side by side, and I said, son, what is faster, makes sense, and you can, and it just makes sense. And it was always the old school method, the algorithm method we learned.
And he doesn't like that.
Yeah.
Well, and the other thing that's problematic, and this is my cynical side from my years on the school board, the reality is we fund children based on what's called weights in Arizona. So if we have more children in special ed for whatever reason, we get more funding per child for that child. A cynic might think there's a method to that madness, but I'm not cynical. Am I? Yes.
I have a 2nd grader who loved math until this year.
Why don't you fast forward to some of
My little 2nd grader loved math. That was his favorite subject until this year, having to draw all those little lines and circles and squares, and he forgot all the old-fashioned way that he had already learned. And now he comes home in tears, frustrated, hates math, feels terrible about himself, and he can't remember how to do it the old way because they never get an opportunity to do it that way.
Well, and I'll say just on this, and we're going to move on, Common Core makes children less knowledgeable, less moral, less American, and we're going to show you some examples of each. But just to show you how pervasive this is, we've got math and language arts. They're starting to implement the science standards, even though our state board hasn't adopted them. They have a committee, the Council of Chief State School Officers has a committee developing frameworks that they'll tell us what it takes for our children to be citizens. And Czar Duncan, who is our education czar, and Eric Holder, who is our Attorney General, have also created discipline standards that they want to impose. So how your school disciplines a child if they have their way will no longer be under our control. And we'll jump to that.
And of course,
Yeah, my math teacher, he teaches statistics.
yep.
Statistics?
Yeah.
Everybody has a word like that.
And I didn't know if it was just statistics that does this, but he taught us earlier on in the semester that we had to write a paragraph describing how we got the problem, and I don't know if that's just Common Core, but
I took statistics in college and I never wrote.
Yeah, I took statistics in college for my engineering degree, but never wrote essays. Common
It's
Core.
called integrating. They want to integrate all the subjects into one. So now let's take a look at less knowledgeable with some math examples. Here's the one, ma'am, like you were talking about, except I have numbers in here. They really wanted to draw circles.
Circles and lines. Circles are the ones, and bars, 1 bar equals 10 circles. And I have another example of that. Here is the problem. Old-fashioned subtraction, the way we learned it, and I apologize, it's a little hard to see. 32 minus 12 equals 20. That's what we would do. We knew it because we drilled those numbers. We internalized them. We got them in our long-term memory. They took a simple one-step subtraction problem and turned it into a 5-step addition problem. So they want the kids to work with what they call friendly numbers. So you take the 12, you add 3 to get 15, and I believe it's 5s and 0s they consider friendly numbers. Then you take the 15, add 5 to get 20, take the 20, add 10 to get 30, take the 30, add an unfriendly 2 to get 32, and then you add this column to ultimately find out that 32 minus 12 is 20. That's insane.
It's ridiculous.
Any comments on those?
Yes.
I'd have to look at that, but I know to figure that out.
I am totally on board, by the way. I do not agree with this. However, my parents, they're divorced, by the way, so this is relevant to the conversation. They do math differently, and my dad always said it because my mom had to do the new math. And that was, for her state, it was in the 70s. And my dad, he's engineer of multiple types, and I was going somewhere with this. And I do math differently than my husband, but we can come with the same answer. So I think, oh yeah, that's what it was. I was talking to him again about it today, and he was talking about how, and this is apparently was a different way than what my mom learned, is a different new math, and how the people always get upset when there's a new way of doing it. And he was saying how a lot of what he's been hearing, and if it's not this per se example, but I brought up the, what was I going to say? It's a math in my head right now like that. No, but the thing about the skill versus the application like you use with the spelling word is a lot of this math supposedly could be a skill set. So this is how a computer would do it, or this is how you apply it here. So I guess I'm looking for a way to come back with, this is not right for this level, I understand that, and this is not, they need to understand the other way first, but there's this positive aspect of it that could come applicable at some point. How do we come back and say, and to me, of course, bring it home and let us tell when it's appropriate for our kids or whatever, but how is it that we can rebuttal that?
Well, you're not going to get the choice to decide whether it's the appropriate method for your child or not. It's going to be decided for you. But the point is, you know, I can understand there might be different ways, especially in kindergarten, to help a child conceptualize these strange and foreign things that are numbers. But once they conceptualize them, they should be able to manipulate them. And the manipulation of them should be as easy and concise as absolutely possible. And that's not what we're doing here. Why would you take what can be done in one step and make it 5? That's never what an engineer is going to do. That's never what a mathematician is going to do. It's never what a scientist is going to do. And we talk, and we've been talking for over 10 years about STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and math, how desperately our country needs these fields. And we need people to populate these fields, but yet we're teaching them the skills that won't ever get them to mastery of those fields.
In order to get a degree like I got, I have an environmental engineering degree, my husband has an electrical engineering degree, I was required to take up to pre-calculus in high school. On the Common Core path, you will only go as far as Algebra 2. So you're from the time you hit college, you'll be in remedial classes in order to get on that career path. But don't worry, we're dumbing down the ACT and SA2 to only go up to Algebra 2 as well. And we'll have college accredited classes now. You won't have to take remedial classes because they're dumbing down everything. So this is what we're experiencing with Common Core. Yes?
One word, ridiculous.
Exactly. Here's another example of the crazy
Here's how
math.
they've changed multiplication. Here's what we would do.
This is what I saw with my son in 4th grade. It was crazy.
And here's what they want them to do, and put it in this big, huge print. Now, complicated enough like this, imagine that the multiplication problem is, I don't know, 10,247 by 5,638. You need a calculator. Exactly. Why would you waste time doing this when this has worked for eons? It just doesn't make sense. Where a lot of these things come from is because in order, and again, no disrespect to any teachers, in order for teachers to increase their salary, they have to get higher levels of education. And often what that education is getting published. So they have to come up with new ways, new theories, new ideas for teaching. And then what they do is they take it to a conference and they present it at a conference and it becomes a quote-unquote best practice. We have a program here in Arizona, it's being phased out. It's called Career Ladders. 20 districts were involved. It was deemed unconstitutional, so it's going away. What a teacher had to do in order to earn their career ladder money, and it was in our district, it was $5,000 or $6,000 bump on their salary a year, was they had to create an experimental idea for teaching something to children, use it for that year, and then write a paper about it to the Career Ladders Committee. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. But my question was, what happens to my daughter's education when you're experimenting with her so you can get more money?
You got a question?
Yeah, I remember it was a long time ago. Yeah, it was 4th grade when we did this, but I remember.
Nothing's a long time ago.
Yeah, you're too young.
I don't remember how this works, but it really did work for me. Like
It works. Oh, it works.
It makes sense too. Like I didn't.
She's got a point there. Take it back to the mom. Take it home.
This one you'll remember forever.
I think when you look at the diagram that we're on right now, it's easy to see that, from my perspective, it's a far more sinister approach in education than just some teacher, wants to get a bonus or what is increase her salary. The obvious, situation that's going to arise is the kids are going to be home, they can't do their homework, they take this kind of garbage to their parents. The parents become ignorant in the children's eyes, and the only people who know anything are the school, hence government people. And that is the only legitimate conclusion that reasonable kids will come to, is my parents are just old geezers, they don't know anything. And so for everything else too, the government, the so-called people in charge have the answers.
And that's exactly what I was seeing with my son. That's why I said, well, let me solve a problem right next to you and show you how many steps it took me. And see how long it takes you. No pressure or anything. We'll do something really simple, even 2-digit multiplication. And time after time after time, he said, Mom, I got to tell you, you're right. This makes sense.
I just wanted to share that Dr. Kimber did his thesis on history of education in America. And some of the things that she is saying is true, that this whole process of dumbing down America and taking control of education, it's actually been in the process for 100 years. And they started it by increasing the school day, because when I was in school it wasn't as long, and we only had 4 9-week sessions. They've lengthened the amount of days, they've lengthened the amount of hours, they've changed meanings of words so that parents didn't have this red flag up because they didn't realize that lifestyle was about sex instead of, you know, living in the country or the city. And so they change things, and they add more and more homework to invade the space of the home because progressives have to limit the amount of influence that parents have on their children. So you have to make school longer, bigger, more complicated, make it so that there's a generation gap so that parents are dumb, which is correct. And so if you actually look at the history of education in America, there's a lot more to this story, and this is just really the final straw for them to take control. And they also have by design that they want a certain percentage to drop out and never pick up a book again because they're so sick of school. And they have to govern people who are obedient or have bought into the social agenda. They can't govern those who are, you know, self-thinkers and self-governed.
Excellent point. This is a way also to drive away the experienced teachers, 15, 20-year experienced teachers who are, you know, they're just sick of it. This is also a way to drive out the experienced teachers and then indoctrinate the new ones in the colleges under this Common Core mantra as well. So we're not only driving students away from learning and wanting to learn, we're also driving good educators away as well through Common Core. There's a question over here.
I was just going to say, I'm all for new ways, you know, because there's so many different ways for us to learn, and we are not all one way. There's not one size fits all. But, you know, they are making it one size fits all with this. Instead of doing, you know, opening it up and saying, hey, we can, if you don't get it this way, then here, try this or try that. Me and my husband just had kind of a fight because we were trying to teach my son a math problem today, and he thought of it from a different way. I'm like, don't tell him that, because we've already got this way. And he's like, you were just doing one way, Common Core. You know? And I'm like, oh, boy, give him some options. You know, give the kids some options.
Well, and to Nancy's point, one of the things they did 100 years ago when they decided to start changing our education system, and they told us their intent was to change American society. They changed how we trained teachers. We used to just pick the people we thought could, at the local school board level, a community would hire the people they thought could teach. They created colleges of education, and teachers no longer studied their content knowledge. They studied theories of education, and their belief was it didn't matter that you knew anything about a subject. If you knew how to teach, you could then pick up any book. And I teach a specialty subject, and I beg to differ with them. If I don't understand, people pay me for my expert knowledge in my area. They don't pay me to throw stuff on the table and say, figure it out.
Right. Samuel?
So ultimately, what it is doing, not only making the parents dumber, it's making the kids unhappy. The happiness of the children is not their priority. Their priority is to make these standards for the whole nation and force them on everyone. What right do they have to tell us that we are guinea pigs? What right do we have to be guinea pigs?
Zero.
Constitutionally, none.
And to add to Diane's point, we're not hiring mathematicians anymore. We're not hiring historians as teachers anymore who are experts in their field. We're hiring educators, any person who can pick up a book, and the kids are not going to get the in-depth knowledge they would get previously if we hire these people who are specialized in their field.
One other thing, these educators, so-called, have been to the colleges, and those people themselves have been educated the way these people wanted them educated and coming to your school. So, you know,
Let me make a point on using phonics as an example. Now, students who learn to read with phonics, reading instruction, have 3 times the vocabulary of students who memorize words, which is called look, say, or whole language. So, the law of the land in Arizona for probably at least 10 years now has been that we will use phonics to teach our children to read. What they've been doing at our colleges of education, at ASU and U of A, I don't think NAU was doing it, but we had 2 whole language gurus who ran the colleges of education. So what they would do is they get prospective teachers and they would give them a week or 2 of phonic instruction. the requirement of the law, but how you really need to teach children to read is using whole language, where they memorize words. They can't spell words they've never seen before. They can't read words they've never seen before. They only know the words they've memorized. Memorization works for arithmetic, not so much for reading.
And I saw that exact example. I had my kids in public school arena in the Kyrene School District, and especially the last two children of mine, where they not only did whole language learning, but they also were doing nonsense words, three-letter words, which were garble, that if they say this also means, one or whatever. And I was just appalled. The youngest child, who was 8, was struggling terribly in reading. I pulled her out once this Common Core nonsense came on the scene and put her in a school where they're teaching spalding, which is phonics-based learning. She went from a 3rd grade reading level to a 7th grade reading level in just a few months, because she wasn't memorizing words anymore. She was teaching phonics and the relationship, and she was just excelling. I was smacking myself in the head going, what took me so long to get her out of this nonsense? Because she's doing fabulously right now.
I was always thankful my daughter got through the Peoria School District before we got a new superintendent who started implementing a lot of this junk. Under whole language, words can be, they can swap them. So cat and kitten are deemed the same. If the word is cat and they say, well, kitten, okay, that's close enough.
Well, I feel like, because I don't know where your slides are, but sometimes with this whole Common Core thing, I think people forget some of the most important points are, and that is, number one, we've given away our sovereign right as a state to choose. And so, okay, maybe you do want your children to have 2 or 3 ways to do math, or maybe you think that there might be some application of something, further on down the road. It doesn't matter anymore, because with Common Core, you don't have a choice as a parent. It doesn't matter if you, don't want to have this. You can go to the principal, you can go to the state, to the district, people. It doesn't matter. They will not be able to help you. And so the state sovereign right to choose is the most dangerous aspect of this, of all things, because we don't have a say. And the fact that they have actually not released all of the things that they're going to, that Planned Parenthood does get to teach sex ed, that they are already starting in Tempe School District. And, there's, the list goes on and on and on.
Yes, it does.
And so, whether if you want to look, you can see and have all the debates on whether the lattice one is okay or whatever. I mean, obviously you don't remember it, so it worked when it did, but it wasn't that good enough that it wasn't that good that you could remember. But the bottom line is, you need to understand that they are lying, that it is not state-led, that it is a federal mandate. It is illegal, and it's designed so that they can control your children. The data processing, the data mining, all of the different, so you need to go through this,
we need to go through
the slides really fast.
I just wanted to add one last point. They called it Common Core for a reason. What does that sound like?
Common denominator.
Common denominator. All of our kids are the same. Communism. That's what it's all about.
We'll show you one more math really quickly, because this one's my personal favorite, so I'll take a moment.
Oh boy.
Long division. They've solved the problem all the way out. They took out the numbers, they put in letters, they give the kids a clue, U equals 5, and then they have to try to reverse engineer this problem. Now, what I didn't tell you about myself was I have a bachelor's degree in business with an emphasis in marketing. I spent my professional career as a financial analyst. I promise you, not once was I ever asked to reverse engineer a long division problem. That's not the point of doing long division. Now shall we move on to less moral for just a moment or two? Less moral. Now, under Common Core, under our English language arts, they have created what they call an exemplar list. And it means that it's reading. It's an example of reading. It doesn't have to be the exact book they put on the list, but the book is an example of what would be appropriate reading. Here's one they used in Sierra Vista, Dreaming in Cuban. You can read the quote, the quote for yourself. I love it when I don't have to read it out loud. This was for 11th graders. It's on the 11th grade exemplar list, and they were actually in Sierra Vista giving it to 10th graders. The next book, now one of the things when I had my epiphany moment
with my daughter was I began tracking everything she did in school. If she was in 3rd grade, what are they teaching? What should they be teaching? Has she mastered it? If they gave her trade books to read, I read them first, so I knew what she would be exposed to. This next one, if I read the little synopsis, I would have thought, what a great book. It's about a little black girl who wishes for blue eyes. What an insight into human nature, right? Problem is, one of the characters is a pedophile. And you can read the descriptions of some of his thoughts and actions. And the ones I put up here are the more clean ones.
Yeah, clean
the
ones.
less,
They're pretty bad.
and they are pretty disgusting. Why would we expose our children to this? Got enough? Had enough? Let's talk about less American for a moment.
Get out of my
Now, what
eyes.
they're doing, so let's get it off of that. What they're doing under Common Core is they call the English language arts standards, standards in literacy, in history, social studies, science, and technical subjects. And so that means they're using English language arts to teach social studies or history. And I hate the term social studies. We should be teaching our children history, civics, and geography. So the first one is for them to write a persuasive argument. Nothing wrong with that. That's a good English language thing for them to be doing, a good homework assignment or whatever. Problem is, in this case, they were asked to read Nazi propaganda, pretend their teacher was a high-ranking Nazi official, and convince him or her that Jews are evil. That's propagandizing our children. The next one, you can't read it. I'm willing to give up some of my constitutional rights in order to be safer, more secure. A 4th grader. A 4th grader doesn't know what their constitutional rights are yet. And then the last one, really quickly, again, a perfect English language arts assignment. Take a sentence and turn it into the possessive form of the sentence, but read the message. He, meaning the president, makes sure the laws of the country or the country's laws, that's the English language part, are fair. The commands of government officials' commands must be obeyed by all. 5th graders hear this time and time and time again, and exactly what Nancy is talking about is going to happen. They're going to be less American. Anything to add to that?
And since when is the president allowed to make any laws? That's basics, you know? Congress shall only make laws. This is also, the government officials' commands must be obeyed. You know, again, we have no rights. We have to...
The well-being of an individual.
Yes.
Common Core was actually, like C-Scope was kind of a forerunner of it. And so we know some of the stuff that's happening because in Texas, when people say, oh, Texas didn't take Common Core, they didn't have to accept C-Scope. And so they actually wanted to, so it is worse, but they, Common Core is copying that, and they, with history, have made it so that all of the founding fathers are vilified, demonized. They've been doing that for a long time. Like literally, there are children my kids' ages who think that they were, had, mistresses, etc., etc. But they've also now made it so like the Boston Tea Party is a terrorist attack, and all of the people who are the heroes are people who are like the women's rights movement or the abortion people who got abortions legal or different the homosexual. So just different people who have those social agendas instead of the founding fathers and the Constitution.
Well, and the other thing they're doing with the English language arts is they use exemplars. So they say, well, we've included the historical documents, Lincoln's Gettysburg Address or the Declaration of Independence. What they do is they teach them snippets of those documents, and they teach them with no historical content. So read the Gettysburg Address. Well, why is the Gettysburg Address impressive? Is if you've studied that battle, if you've studied the Civil War, you understand what that did to our country. To just read it as a document is not have the same impact without all that context.
Yes, I am.
So, with the last two statements and the whole thing about the Nazi assignment, I can relate to that. I'm studying World War II in history and in English right now. And what it looks like it's trying to say is that government official commands must be obeyed by all. That sounds a lot like the Nazis and the German Empire. Individuals' wants are less important than the nation's well-being. That sounds a lot like the Nazi German Empire during World War I and World War II. It's pretty ridiculous how they try to seem that, oh, the Nazis were great people, the Jews were evil. It's ridiculous how they try to make that, like the Boston Tea Party, that was a terrorist attack. How? It's pretty ridiculous what they try to make us.
Yeah, the colonists were sick of the terrorist attacks on the tea, so they did that as a statement by throwing the tea that the Great Britain were going to be making money off of from the taxes and tariffs into the Boston Harbor. That was no way a terrorist attack. That was, we're going to fight against the man, Great Britain, and we're not going to pay your tariffs and taxes anymore. That's what it was about.
I know it is.
And there, not to mention the little program of having the children disclose what goes on at home that's in disagreement.
Segway!
There we go.
Common Core data collection.
And their goal is to follow individuals through school and into and through their work life, and they want to be able to match workforce data with education data, and we will have massive data collection under Obamacare. So if you go to your doctor now, they're asking all kinds of questions they shouldn't be asking. They'll have the ability to meld these, beginning with pre-kindergarten through post-secondary school, through entry and sustained participation in the workforce. Ladies and gentlemen, here's a little campaigning moment for you. This is what they do in Communist China. Communist China is where Pierce Publishing, the largest publishing company in the world, paid our superintendent to go to observe their education system. As a candidate, I don't promise people things I can't guarantee I can provide. I will promise you one thing here tonight. I will never go to a communist country to observe how they educate their children, because we were the best in the world at it long before they even thought about it. So this is ridiculous that this is what we're modeling our education system after.
And what are the kinds of things that they're going to be distributing on our children? It's not just how Johnny performed on the math exam. It's what are his parents' voting record? Who do they vote for? How much money do they make?
Guns in the house?
Are guns in the house? Is Johnny on a remedial program? Does he get free lunch? Is he a gifted student or not? Etc., etc. So it's this humongous database. And the reason they want to track our students and link it into Obamacare is because that's what the rest of the world is doing, especially communist nations. In order to have a one-world government, we need to be like the rest of the world. Nationalize health care, nationalize education. Those are the last two planks, so we can be like everybody else.
So they're asking these, I know they're asking these questions. My nephew just got a questionnaire last week in school. His parents had no idea about it. So he came home and asked how much money his parents make, who they voted for in the last election, all kinds of stuff about their home life. So I know that's happening. What are they trying to do with that? I want to understand why on earth they need that.
Oh, they're claiming they're using it for marketing purposes to determine how they can better control the marketplace. We need to know where these kids and their families are spending their money and where the eventual money pool is going to go to. We're using this for marketing purposes. You have nothing to worry about. No, this is all about the man tracking your kids from preschool all the way up through the workforce. And if you look at a video by Pearson, I have it on the website, it's very interesting. It shows a kid going into school with his tablet. As soon as he hits through the door of the school, due to the GPS in the tablet, boop, he's in school. And it shows him talking to his mom throughout the day on his assignments. You're like, oh, that's kind of cool, that's kind of cool. But towards the end of the video on there, it shows, based on his grades, what colleges he should apply for and what careers he's good for. How dare they determine what my kid, is what career he's capable of and what college he's capable of. I have a good friend of mine who didn't have a good background in school, but she worked her tail off and became a doctor. No one can determine anyone's career path. You just can't. This is America. How dare they?
I just wanted to share, my husband is Lithuanian. His parents were the first boatload of married immigrants allowed into Australia after the war. His father was taken by the Germans and forced to work in camps. His grandfather was taken by the Russians and deported to Siberia, where he spent the rest of his days. His mother and grandmother were also supposed to be deported, but because Lithuania is in the crossroads between Germany and Russia, there was a slight reprieve, and so they had a chance to get out. If you really want to understand what's going on, you have to understand that this is part of a bigger picture. And in these countries, they knew exactly who was a threat to them, and in the middle of the night, Grandpa was taken to Siberia and never seen again. And, you know, you think that it couldn't happen because this is America, but I am telling you right now, if you think that Common Core and this takeover and the loss of our sovereign right is something that's just, you know, silly and we don't need to worry about it, you're kidding yourself. Because there are people who have spent a lot of money and their life's work. You know, people like Curtis Bowers, who's done The Agenda, The Grinding Down of America. If you haven't seen it, find it on Vimeo. But it's happening. And we have to be aware, because it's not only at the schools that they're getting those tests, but it's now at the hospital or the doctor's office. You know, they are tracking these children because they want to know who is voting, who would oppose them, and they have to make sure that what they are teaching them or indoctrinating them is working.
Well, and we were last week we were talking at a different school, and the principal said the PARC test, which is being field tested here in Arizona, even though we have not chosen, our State Board of Ed hasn't chosen it to be adopted for our children, there's a whole section beyond the quote-unquote academic testing that's all questions. And he's the principal of the school, and he is not allowed to see those questions. You as parents will not be allowed to see those questions.
Eventually you won't see the books. In Texas, they don't.
That's why they do the e-books. I've heard of districts where they have e-books and the kids are given a login password and they're not supposed to give it to their parents. And I struggle with this because e-books from a school board perspective could be a good resource, but you have no way they can upload a new edition or a new, I can't think of what addition to it, and it may be very different, and you'll never know. In the Peoria School District, before we adopted a book, every single book and teaching materials and testing materials were put on display in our district office, so if anybody wanted to come and see them and review them and see what was in them, or we're comparing book A to book B to book C, you could read through them all. With electronic versions, that will not happen, I guarantee you that.
There is something that I don't think is heard mentioned much, and I'm not sure why. I don't know where I heard it originally, but the only place I heard about was the Iroquois. There's a quote, and it's on the 7th Generation brand, where they do it for the 7th generation down. Does anybody know the quote? Okay. It's the idea that they take care of the earth as though their 7th generation down as their own children, as themselves, kind of idea. Well, that is not unique to them. Was previous to our modern culture, a common thought, and our founding fathers knew about it. And the communism people, as a people, have that same in their culture still today. The Middle East still has it in their culture today. They will put their lives on the line, not just for their own here and now, like our culture is for right now, and not just for their children, like here our culture in some ways still is, but for 7 generations ahead. We could talk all night about all the things, all the reasons, and all the ways that they're doing it, because it will take all night, because they have been doing it for that many generations past. We are just in the middle of it. We're not even the end of the line of what they have in mind. So it's not a small picture.
Exactly. Samuel, you've been patient. What did you want to say?
Sort of relating to what you said earlier about the kid with the tablet and choosing like what colleges and what jobs he would be likely to fit in. We read a book last semester in English called The Giver. I forgot who wrote it. And in the future, basically, there's things like population control. There are things where when kids reach certain ages, they get like new privileges. Like when one age you get a new bike, one age you get like clothes and stuff. And it's like, and when like you reach a certain age, there's this like drawing that happens, and whatever job you get chosen, that's the job you work in for the rest of your life. And there's no escaping out of that. Like in the future, there's also this person called the Giver, who the humans decided they didn't want to have all these memories of bad, painful things, so they gave it to this one guy because they didn't want to have everyone feel the same.
Yeah, it's communism at its finest. And I just wanted to talk back what Diane was talking about parents not having control of the tablets and things like that when everything's online. It also takes out of the equation of the tactile learning that our students have. I have a daughter who, when she's studying her math and working on assignments, she needs to go back and the physical touching and flipping of the books. It's such a valuable thing where she can go back and look. Yeah, the new Kindles are flippable and things like that, but just having a tactile touch and learning skills, a lot of kids need to actually have the physical touching of the book pages and things like that, not just having a hard device.
And another problem, and I'm a Nook fan. I have my Nook, I love my Nook, and I started buying books in it, and then I realized, what am I doing? Great for novels, but if ever an electronic book can be made to disappear. And so if there's a day when, never thought of that, did you? All of a sudden it hit me. Reference books I now buy in hard copy, and I keep in hard copy, they can be removed. Oh, park test,
We've talked a lot about
Did you have a comment?
I just wanted to mention that they're not teaching or
Right.
spelling. So how are they going to read original documents? How are they going to read their ancestors' journals? How are they going to understand the founding of America?
Oh, don't worry about that. We're going to be reading user manuals now and informational text. We're not going to be learning good literature anymore, because in college we have to read user manuals. I don't know about you, but I went to college and I wasn't reading a lot of mechanical user manuals in college. So there's an increase in reading non-informational texts instead of literally knowledge texts as well. And Dr. Stotsky, she was the only lady on the Common Core Validation Committee who wrote English language arts standards for the highest ranking state in the nation, Massachusetts. She would not sign off on the Common Core standards because they would not make our students more critical thinkers. They were not internationally benchmarked. They were told they were a rubber stamp committee, and they were required to sign an agreement that they would not talk to anybody while on this committee on what they were doing or afterwards. And the only mathematician on this committee, Dr. Jim Milgram, would not sign off on the math standards as well because they would not prepare our students for a four-year university, only a community college. They would not prepare our students for science, technology, engineering, and math. And they would slow down and dumb down our students by more than 2 years. And I've seen that firsthand in my son.
And we've talked about the testing, so we don't need to go on here. The PARC test is one, the Smarter Balance is another one, that they're both federally funded, but they're also rewriting the ACT, the ACT test. David Coleman, who I mentioned in the beginning, the architect of Common Core, he's now the chairman or the president, whatever they call it, of the College Board, which writes the SAT, and they're taking out the writing portions and they're basically dumbing that down too. So just to kind of finish up, and then we can talk if there's any questions left. Charter schools already have to apply, adhere to Common Core. There's something in our state called the Declaration of Alignment. Every school board president, every superintendent, every principal, and every charter school board must sign it and say they will use the state standards, the Common Core standards that the state board had adopted. Homeschoolers, private schools will be forced to comply if you want to get your kids into college, and these are the tests they're using. They're going to have to be taught in alignment with the test. And we had great parents' rights here in Arizona, and those are the statutes that protected some of them. If you wanted to review curriculum, you could. If you wanted to opt your child out, you could get different curriculum. In 2005, there was a lawsuit that went up through the state of California, Fields v. Palmdale. It was over sex education, sexual content children were exposed to in school without their parents' knowledge. It made its way all the way up to the Ninth Circuit, and the Ninth Circuit Court ruled that parents have the right to pick their child's school, but once the child is enrolled in that school, the parents lose the constitutional rights at the door. They have no right to say what goes on in that school. That is very scary. I've not seen a lot of that happening here in Arizona, but if we have a whole bunch of parents that want to opt kids out of Common Core, a district can say one of two things. Take your child and go. Where are you going to go? All the schools are the same. Or they're going to say sue us, because they know they will win,
because ours is no longer a legal system based on the Constitution. Ours is a legal system based on precedent. That's what our attorneys study, is precedent. So they'll look to this, they'll go, oh, parents lost their constitutional rights at the schoolhouse door. We don't have to allow them to opt out. This case was appealed to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court refused to hear the appeal. So it's a very scary thing.
I don't know about you guys, but we have to do everything we can to drive this out of our state. And the two most important offices in the state in order to do that is this fine gal right here, Superintendent of Public Instruction. They lead the State Board of Education, and the governor. The governor controls any federal money that comes into our state. And our governor likes to have her big federal government purse open to any free money that she can get. We need to replace her. She's the one who signed us up for Common Core with the former superintendent, Tom Horn, our current Attorney General. Those two signed us up for Common Core. So we, the people, need to elect people who are constitutional, people who understand and believe in protecting state rights and our state sovereignty. And Diane, to me, is the gal. I think she had her hand up first over here.
I didn't understand what you said. How does this affect homeschoolers?
Well, homeschoolers, just like people in charter schools and public schools, will have to take an entrance exam into a university. Most four-year universities require the ACT or SAT, and if they don't, if they're a community college, they require an entrance exam test in order to get into that university. It's going to be heavily weighted on if your student or child has taken the PARCC test or not. If they haven't taken the PARCC test, they'll go, well, I don't know if you're going to be ready for our university or not.
Well, and two other points. Think about who issues licenses to work. Contractor's license, electrician's license, plumber's license. If they're not under Common Core, they may say, we're not going to issue that license. And then thinking to Nancy's bigger picture, if the federal government, and I always pray I'm wrong on this, but watch history, if they decide homeschooling is not going to be allowed, homeschooling will not be allowed. There are parts of this country, well, there's parts of the world, there's parts in this country where homeschooling is not permitted. I can't remember if it was Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont, one of the New England states. They don't allow homeschooling. Parents were homeschooling their children. I think this goes back about 10 years ago. The state took custody of the children, legal custody of the children, although they allowed the children to stay in the home with the parents. All the parents said is, we just want to move to a state where we can homeschool our children. No, we, the state, have legal custody of your children. You are not moving. You are sending them to school, traditional school, and you may not leave.
Pluck them up to try to use them in a case and try to fight against them, saying that you don't have a right in America to homeschool your children. It's not a human right.
It's a God-given right.
It's a God-given, it's a natural right. It's a natural right.
Our constitutional rights are God-given rights that the Constitution protects. There's nothing that can be taken away by man.
What you were saying earlier, California has already started like suspending parents from school.
Yes.
They've already started that. I mean, it's crazy.
Could you imagine
if your school called you and said, you're suspended?
And it's because why they were
allow your child to stay in that school? If I couldn't go on the campus where my daughter attended school, my daughter would not be there.
And you know why they were suspended from the school is because that mom was having one of her, he was handing out anti-Common Core opt-out forms, and so that's why she was suspended from the school.
My friend was already arrested in Chandler for going onto the school campus, and they didn't want her to go.
Whoa, yeah, we can do it.
In Chandler School District.
Disrupting the educational process.
So I just want you to know that right now the schools don't discriminate against homeschooled families because the homeschooled kids are actually score better on their tests, etc. But you have to understand that they ultimately want to eliminate homeschooling. So it hasn't happened yet. Well, they don't. But we still pay taxes into the system that goes into education. So,
but it goes by student
enrollment
seats in student butts in chairs.
So the other thing you have to understand is that I still believe that there will be those who rise up to provide an education. for those, we've got some politicians and people like David Barton and others who they're not just sitting around doing nothing. And so I've had kids in lots of different in his placement test here in Arizona in math. But now he's decided maybe pathology, and I don't know how to get around that, for him to go to school. But with my little boys, I'm going to make sure that they have skills and all sorts of things that they can do to be self-sufficient. So that if they, depending on what happens during that next time, I don't know, I don't have a crystal ball. But I can see the way that we're going, I can see the road, I've seen what's happened with my husband's family. And so right now here at Kemper Academy, we're just trying to make sure that these kids, number one, have a relationship with God. Number two, they're critical thinkers. Number three, that they have the ability with their parents to decide, what they want to do, give them skill sets, etc., etc. You've got to be aggressive. And for me, the whole thing is, and I know that that's not your goal, but I would say get your kids out of public school. And either homeschool them or put them in a private school that doesn't do Common Core. But if you keep them there and just complain, then they're not going to take as much notice as if you put your kids out of school.
And that's exactly what I do with my younger children. My other two are already attending a private charter school. My younger two are now attending a private charter school because I was seeing this indoctrination and the dumbing down of my younger two children. That's the goal I made. I live in Chandler. I commute to Mesa and Gilbert every single day, and it's a time commitment, but it's worth making that time commitment because I'm saving their souls and I'm saving them from the indoctrination. They're still having to be exposed to the PARCC test unless I can do everything I can to stop it, and we're working really hard to do that. So there's still free choice here in Arizona until Common Core gets really shoved down our throats. There is options, there's homeschooling, there's private charter schools, etc. It's public school. Right.
You said that the two most important are, superintendent of public instruction and the governor. And I'm starting to get lots of the leaflets. There's a lot of people running for governor. Is there anybody that has come out with an anti-Common Core, agenda at this point? Who would you like to, if you, are the superintendent of public instruction, who do you want to see as governor?
You're not the superintendent. I have not formally endorsed anybody yet, just because of the dynamics of a race, but I believe the only one who will truly stop Common Core is Frank Riggs. Number one, he was a 3-term congressman. He in California. He kept his commitment. He made a term limits commitment, so he kept that. He was part of Newt Gingrich's Gang of Seven, who worked on the contract with America and actually exposed the House banking scandal. And so he has a track record. He knows how Washington works. He knows how to get Washington out of our state. He has made the promise. He made it again last night at an event we were both at, that on day one, if he is the governor, he will write an executive order to remove Common Core from our schools. If I'm the superintendent, I will make darn sure he keeps that pledge. Scott Smith completely believes in it and supports it. The others, to varying degrees, say some kind of dance around the issue. Doug Ducey dances around the issue. Ken Bennett dances around the issue. I don't think he'll push it out. Christine Jones, she says she's opposed to it, but she's someone that has no track record whatsoever, so we don't know what her beliefs and her values are, and I'm not making a judgment either way, just don't know. Who else are we forgetting?
That's pretty much it. Al Melvin, he submitted our Get Out of Common Core bill this session, which died in the legislature. But well-roundedness, I think the best person who understands our federal fight to defund Common Core and our state fight to protect our state sovereignty. It is Frank Riggs, and I have officially endorsed him on my website, Arizona's Against Common Core. I met with him personally. I sent him tons of literature. He's open to be educated, and he's extremely educated and believes in school choice, just like I do. And so I think he's the best man for the job, hands down.
If they can get Common Core out, will it just go back to Ames?
We can decide that.
We can decide that. We have bills in the legislature this session which would allow that the local school districts and charter schools to adopt their own standards as long as they were as good as the year 1999 standards or better, and their own assessments, not necessarily even Ames, but their own assessments to determine that their students were proficient. I don't know about you at Kimber Academy, but my kids are already tested every week on what they are learning, and they are tested monthly on in Spalding and how they're performing on their phonics, the reading comprehension, math facts, how they're learning their history, geography, etc. Why do we even need another assessment test, a standardized test? We already know every single week how our students are performing. Why do we need an Ames test is my question.
We had that in Peoria. For every course we offered, we had a pre-test in that course, and we had an end-of-course assessment. And if a student didn't score a certain grade on the end-of-course assessment, they did not get credit for the course, and they'd either have to repeat it or take a comparable course or something else. Districts are very capable of doing this. Now, key to this is you have to pay attention to your elections at your local school boards and know who the people are and understand and actually make them explain to you what their vision for education is.
So, do we have anything to fall back on besides Ames?
We have our Arizona state standards. Quite frankly, the standards movement was created, and I'm beginning to believe created in the 90s to ultimately get us here. Before the mid-1990s, we didn't have standards for our schools, but yet our schools across the nation were relatively the same. Not exactly the same, because there were a lot of local nuances. But we knew if you took a 5-year-old and brought them into school, they needed to learn their numbers. Then they needed to learn how to add their numbers, subtract their numbers, multiply and divide them. They needed to learn letter sounds. Then how to put those letter sounds together to create words. I mean, these are all consistencies throughout our education system. And we did that for over 200 years. With that, we created the most successful economic engine on the face of the earth. We protected and saved more lives than any country ever before in the history of mankind. We knew how to educate our children. We let the federal and the government and the progressives take control. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. Hope you learned a lot.
Thank you.
And we knew how to do that. So we need to take back that control. We need to get back to basics. We need to get our children, once again, taking their education seriously. There's too many kids, not everybody, but too many kids who don't have much knowledge and, quite frankly, don't care that they don't have much knowledge. They think, well, I'll just look it up on my smartphone. And they see no value to having stuff in their brains. It's very sad.
So is there a one-line answer to satisfy? Because we ask, well, what instead of Ames? Well, what instead of, like you're saying, just their curriculum and their tests and their end-year results, basically, right? Is that kind of like the one-line answer of what we do instead?
I believe that local school boards should deal with that issue. We should get good people on school boards. One of the things I want to do as superintendent, one of the problems now, is that our school board members, once they're elected, they receive their training through the Arizona School Boards Association. God bless you. And basically what that association tells school board members is their job is to hire a superintendent and then vote yes to whatever that superintendent wants to do. Well, that's not what an elected representative does. One of the things I want to do as superintendent is create a training program for school board members that teaches them what their duty is to their community to implement things such as standards or testing or curriculum or finance. You know, I was one of the few school board members that actually understands our Arizona school funding formula, and it made them crazy. They expect people to come in with no knowledge of that and have no clue where the money's going. Well, I'll make sure that your school board members understand where your tax dollars are going.
And have you seen, perhaps, maybe not yet, but is there an area that you can expect maybe be, I don't know, massive, like a flagship, like an example area that we can, because I kind of sit down and go home and do it, you know, but it's like,
I haven't, when it comes, I mean, there's so many areas.
Well,
we know Massachusetts had good standards. We know we had good standards.
Right.
If we wanted
so like when you're superintendent and there's a district that is succeeding in this ideal way, Have you seen anybody stand up
There
that
is-
potentially could do that yet?
Well, first of all, there's no one ideal, and that's the problem with Common Core. We're talking about human beings here. We're talking about little people. There is no one right answer.
Thank you. I was looking for verbiage I needed. Thank you.
Yeah, there is no right answer, and we were already having high-performing school districts before Common Core came on the scene. Instead of just adopting Common Core that hasn't been field tested, that is even work, why aren't we learning from our high-performing school districts and proliferating? What are they doing in the classroom? What curriculum are they using, etc.? Why aren't we learning from high-performing school districts? Instead, we're obviously doing something right.
Pushed in Peoria, because what we had in the Peoria School District is what all large school districts have. Every single school was a cookie cutter of the next with the exact same programs. Well, we started piloting, not charter schools, magnet school programs, if you will. So we had a traditional school. We had one school that it was an English immersion program. So you can't teach Spanish-speaking children in Spanish. You must immerse them in English, but if they're English-speaking students, by law, we can teach them to be bilingual. So we had a bilingual program. We had all different kinds of programs. That's what makes America great. That's what will make Arizona great, is different schools trying different things. If it doesn't work, that's another problem in education. I could go on all night. But we would adopt new programs, and we would never say we're going to implement this program for 6 months, and this is going to be how we're going to measure whether it's successful or not. Really, it was devised by someone, generally a teacher or a principal, and they just implement it and they just do it until they either ran out of funding or students stopped enrolling or whatever, but never, in order to be successful, this many children have to do this, or this grade has to be achieved, or whatever the measure would be. We just put them in place and just do them.
Sounds like a job description of getting it out for occupational therapy.
Exactly.
It's on. Okay. I wanted to thank you for everything that you've done. I'm a retired educator. I taught at Mountain View High School, government and economics, that nasty social studies group. And the lady who is with me, Jane, is an officer in the Paradise Republican Women's Club. And we both want to thank you for filling us in. I've been retired for 6 years, so Common Core is something new to me that I've only heard a little bit about through my colleagues. But we did want to thank you, and we have to leave, and I apologize for that. But thank you very much.
I think we probably all have to leave the witching hours here.
It's our pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Thank you all so much for coming.
I just want to take a second and thank Jennifer and Diane. I think this is probably both of your third or fourth trip over here to ours.
Yeah, we love coming here.
And so I just want to say that, you know, this conversation, I mean, I feel like I've become this like little magnet for understanding what's happening in America with history and the education, you know, the history of education in America and Common Core and all these things, which I don't think any of us really started out to be. And I think the thing that you just really have to remember is it's your children, and God gave them to you on purpose. And you must not just put your head in the sand and think that it's all going to go away or it's all going to be okay. You've got to take the responsibility that God gave you and make sure that they are getting the kind of education you want them to have, and realize that they are being indoctrinated in the public school program the way they have it. We have to vote for people that will try and serve our best interests instead of the interests of people like the Gates and others who really are in this for financial gain. And really, truly, when they said thank you to both of you for coming, there's not enough words. They've come out here a lot of times for me, and they know that I'm a kindred spirit at heart, and you know that we're all trying to do things. And I didn't even know Jennifer when I had to go debate somebody from Jan Brewer's office with Common Core debate with the Arizona Republican Women's Group, and it was the most terrifying thing I'd ever done, because I'm just a mom, and this was this educated very well pruned, groomed and designed. Everything was perfect. And I'm just a mom, But it was the best experience I've ever had, to go there and actually just be able to speak from my heart and remind people what it's all about. It's about our children. And because my husband's family has been taken by the Germans and the Russians, and had this great impact, I tell you, all of these things, if you look at history, it's all happened before. And all of these things, if you want to go get educated more, look at The Agenda, The Grinding Down of America by Curtis Bowers. It's amazing. You can find it for free. It's not on YouTube because it's too long. You can buy the video. We had him come for the Raise the Standard event when Glenn Beck and David Barton came. And Curtis Bowers, literally, he mortgaged his house. He went to Berkeley, I don't know who goes to Berkeley really, but he did. And he went there and was in journalism and got assigned to go do a report on a communist group. And he thought it was like a joke, like a lark, and he was probably going to find some college kids or something like that. And he was shocked out of his mind when he went there, and it was all these adults who were very powerful in the community, well-dressed with their briefcase, etc. And he ties in all of the things that are happening in education, in the government, who funded Obama, how in the world he could get into office anyway with his lack of experience and not even knowing if he's really eligible to be the President of the United States, and nobody seems to care, and all of these things, and he ties it back over the last century and tells you who all the players are and how we've gotten here. Get educated. Pull your children out. Of course, I'd love them all to be at Kimber Academy, but if they can't, homeschool them. Do something different. Charter schools are not safe in the long run because they take state and federal funding, so they will be forced to comply as well. And we've had several school owners who have been here who own multiple schools when Thomas Jefferson Center for Constitutional Restoration has come here. And we've had so many politicians that have been here that are conservative ones, and it's been interesting to meet some of these people as they've been here and hear their story and how they've tried to say we don't want to have it, and they said, well, if you're going to take our funding, you have to. So you've got to be awake. That's the first thing. You must be awake. It's not the same. In 1957, they took prayer out of schools. Before that time, America was #1 in the world. Now we spend the most money on each child for education, and we are so far ranked, they don't even rank us anymore. So what's happened? I was in school in the 60s, 70s. This is so embarrassing. Anyway, and then with my kids, I've been, involved with school with my children in the 80s, 90s, zeros, and now the 10s. So from the 1960s on, I have been involved in education either as a child or with my own children. It's changed a lot. So when I was in school in the 60s, we still had some of those older teachers who were conservative and God-fearing, God-loving, people, and so the impact wasn't so great. But now you look at it and, I've been roasted on my Facebook page for posting some of the things, and some of these young girls who are just finishing their teaching degree, she said, Nancy, you got roasted, but that book, it is on the list, and I've seen it. And, some of these things, because people are trying to say, that's too sensationalized, Nancy, you should check your facts or whatever. And I've had calls from friends who used to live in Gilbert that live in Texas who have said, Nancy, it is happening, it's true, I don't even know what my kids are testing, I can't see any books, and they, so people are often afraid to say anything on Facebook, they'll just let me get roasted, but they call me, or they text me, or they email me, and they tell me all of it. So I just want to thank you guys, you've been crusaders. I will stand by you for the end of days, and thank God for the work that you're doing, and we need more people like you, so if we can thank them very much for them coming.
Wes asked me to announce that we're having a walk to collect signatures for me on Saturday, and we have a sheet if you're available and you'd be willing to help, or take a petition and ask a few friends and neighbors. I remember the day, I was in first grade, that it was after a weekend, and we came into school that day, and every other day before that, the teacher opened the Bible and read us a passage. And I remember us as a class saying, Miss Merrill, you forgot to read the Bible today. And she said, I'm not allowed to anymore, children. Remember, all it takes for evil to prosper is good people to do nothing. Amen. Good night. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming.
time, please?